We're all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you. Uh, Glad that some of you could be here virtually because of the disruption of, I guess you could say, disruption of this transportation there system there. Uh, let's start this time together today with prayer. I invite you to turn your attention inward, feel your breathing, let your body find a comfortable position and relax. In this time of prayer, if there is anything that is disturbing in your life, there are those that in your life who are in need of healing or supply or guidance. If you are in need of healing, supply, or guidance, or if you just have some goal that you are seeking, I invite you to turn that and anything else over to God, to let it go. In this time together, we do not focus on our needs. Instead, we focus on the answer to our needs. God the good, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. We turn these things over, re-release them, and we focus our full attention on the reality of the divine within us and all around us, connecting us. What names or words for the divine are most helpful for you to feel and realize that presence and that reality? Perhaps the word father or mother, word spirit, higher power, higher mind, divine wisdom, divine love. What word, what name, or words and names will strongly connect you to and suggest to you that divine presence? I invite you to begin focusing on that alone, those names, the words, the qualities that you associate with God, with the divine omnipresence. Be not concerned if this word or name is not part of the vocabulary of others that you interact with. Here in this time, you are making your connection, your divine connection in consciousness with that greater power, that higher mind, that infinite one. We continue to focus only on this, our words and names for God, to lift our consciousness higher into the realization of the reality of that presence and power within us and in our lives and all around us. To do this effectively, we go more deeply inward, to a deeper place of stillness and silence. So now I invite you to rely wholly on the core, the essence of your consciousness, word or names or words or names that help you feel and realize that reality. And so we take some time now to simply sit in the silence, Now then, this time of silence, confidence, and gratitude. We have released all concerns, knowing the divine presence is now, that divine reality is now, meeting our every need and lifting us to a higher consciousness, the divinity that is the core and reality of what we are. And so it is. Amen. Bring our attention back gently to this place. Breathe. Continue in that feeling of the divine presence, which is the most important thing after all. That's what we're here to know, to experience. It's what connects us deeper at the deepest possible level. So this month, uh, I decided I wanted to, or felt, I should say, I felt guided to focus on teachings of Charles Fillmore, and specifically this month, what in the philosophy we call epistemology. Epistemology is just a fancy word for trying to understand how we know the truth. How do we know the truth? We can sort of stretch that in our unity context to how do we know God, right? So uh, the lessons that I'm doing are based on uh, chapters, articles Charles Fillmore wrote that are related to this idea of knowledge that I think are um, kind of uh, underrated and overlooked in unity a lot of times. Just sort of how do we know? You know, we use all these affirmations, but what is sort of the basis of that? So this is kind of Charles Fillmore's view, which I think has a great deal of value for us as individuals, to ideas that are helpful for us in knowing our truth, in knowing our God. So the first article I want to talk about was a response to a new thought leader of the time named Helen Wilmans. So Helen Wilmans was a very successful journalist and publisher and author. She was one of the most prominent early New Thought teachers and publishers in the era. She called her work mental science. Uh, like the Fillmores and many others, she had studied with Emma Curtis Hopkins. And so Helen Wilmans in 1894 wrote an article in her magazine in which she objected to something that Charles Fillmore had written in the Unity or Thought magazine. She objected to Charles Fillmore's use of the words God and Father. And what she wrote sort of specifically was, why not credit the power spoken of to man's creativeness and the source of supply to nature instead of God? And Ms. Wellman's article was titled, Not a Criticism, but a Correction. So here's the picture. These New Thought people are reading each other's publications and sometimes responding to them. And Helen Wilmans is a very prominent figure at the time, in 1894, writes this article, not a criticism, but a correction. And Charles wrote a response in Thought magazine. His response was titled, Not an Answer, but an Opportunity. Okay, so kind of a play on her original title. So in the article, Charles wrote, first of all, Ms. Wellman's criticism is very kindly in tone and does not demand an answer because anyone can see that we differ in the use of words only, which basically is true, right? There's a disagreement about what words we ought to use. So what was the opportunity that he saw? So this was not, again, not an answer, but an opportunity. What's the opportunity? Well, the opportunity he saw was to say a bit more about the use of words, right? And also to share about his own experience and spiritual journey. So he began the article by addressing this idea of this difference of words that Ms. Woolmans had brought up in her magazine. And so he begins with this idea that words, or this truth, I guess you could say, that words are associated with ideas. So it's not the sound of the word or the spelling of the word or even the letters that are used or the alphabet that's used. It's the ideas that the words connect us to. And I thought it was interesting that he gave as an example something from the Chippewa language. Charles, as probably most of you know, grew up in Minnesota and near Indian Native American territories, and he used to play with the Native American children and learn some of their language. So he gives an example. He wrote to the Chippewa, and this is also true actually for the Dakota. The Chippewa, the word water does not convey the idea. Okay, you say water, it would not convey to them the idea of water and what it is and what it does. It's rather the idea, the same idea is connected to the word mine. So water does not convey the idea, but the word mene does. And he goes on to say that Ms. Wilmans wants him to say nature instead of father, mother, God, and so forth, these kinds of more traditional language. But, Charles said, the word nature for him connects to an idea of materialism and a cold, hard, lonely feeling. That's what the idea of nature, the word nature, suggests to his consciousness and his training and background. But, he said, words like Father, Mother, God connects him to the idea and the feeling of a living presence and a knowing. And this knowing he described or used the words, the very atmosphere about me is luminous with intelligence. And also, kind of interestingly to me, in the article, he also uses the word oversoul for this divine reality, the word oversoul. Now, I think he got that from his readings of Emerson's essays. Emerson wrote an essay called The Oversoul. And so I can't resist a little minor digression here to sort of share some quotations that I think are relevant to Charles Fillmore's idea of the nature of God. This is from Emerson's essay, The Oversoul. Emerson wrote, the supreme critic on all the errors of the past and the present, and the only prophet of that which must be, is that great nature in which we rest as the earth lies in the soft arms of the atmosphere. That unity, that oversoul, within which every person's particular being is contained and made one with all other. And then one other quote from the essay, he says, within humanity, Emerson says, within humanity is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. So, the first point in the article about the nature of knowledge and about how to know the truth is that words connect to ideas and feelings. So the words we use make a difference in what we experience. So when we get into issues of semantics, what Charles is suggesting is that we need to look behind the words to the ideas and the feelings and the experiences those words connect us with. There is currently a kind of controversy among unity teachers about the words we use in prayer. And so I find this point very relevant. There are those in unity who teach that we must not use words that suggest separation from God, and who insist we should only use I am statements or statements that affirm God within us. They suggest that we never address God, that you should never address God as you would a person, because they say this suggests separation. But of course, this approach carried to an extreme would rule out using biblical prayers. This extreme approach would rule out, for example, using the Lord's Prayer, which clearly addresses God as an intimate person, as Father. Also, like Ms. Wilmans, these well-intentioned teachers suggest that words like father and mother also suggest separation. And that may very well be true for those who teach this. And others in unity follow the Fillmores in freely using words like God and Father, Mother, and Holy Spirit and Christ. And they affirm our oneness and the idea of God within. So, in other words, it's not an either or proposition. We say something like God is omnipresent, spirit, absolute good. We are affirming the reality of God. We're talking about God. We are not using an I am statement, and yet we are expressing a truth that's powerful for us. So I believe that Fillmore's point in the article makes sense, which is this: the sort of practical sense of it is use the words that help you feel the presence. That's the important thing, not what someone else thinks the words are you should use, but what words and names help you feel the presence, feel that connection with the divine. And another part of the point here, really, in this article is that you can find out which words work best for you by experimenting in prayer. Now, in terms of the approaches that Ms. Woolmans and Mr. Fillmore took, they're very similar to approaches that are taken today. Ms. Woolmans was focused on the power of thought to get things, to heal and to prosper, like many people who talk a lot about the law of attraction, right? And that is all well and good as far as it goes. Mr. Fillmore was looking for something more, and it becomes clear in this article. He was looking for a consciousness of the divine presence and a consciousness and a connection with the reality underlying all the appearances, including the appearances of things of stuff that we may bring into our lives. He wanted to connect with what Emerson called the eternal one, the oversoul, the Father, Mother, God. He wanted to connect with that divine unity and wise silence. In other words, his aspiration was mystical rather than sort of straightforwardly prosperity or healing. Now, Mr. Fillmore had witnessed Myrtle Fillmore's healing and other healings in this New Thought movement, and he wanted to understand that. And so in the article, he talks about that. He goes on in the article to tell about how he studied various versions of what he called Christian Science. And we know what he meant by that, sort of in historical context, was not just Christian Science as the of that particular organization, but all of the people that were teaching what we now call New Thought. It went under various names, such as mental science that Ms. Woolmans used, New Thought, Mind Cure. He also studied theosophy and Eastern religions and even studied spiritualist teaching. So Mr. Fillmore was really searching far and wide to understand what it was he was witnessing. And he goes on in the article and says that what he found was that there seemed to be some ideas, important ideas, held in common by all these different teachers and teachings, but the teachings also had conflicting statements. And so he found himself, as he studied, going and entering into kind of state of confusion about the whole thing. And it is at this point in the article that Charles says one of the things that's most famous in the Unity movement, and I'm pretty sure you've heard it, right? This saying: "I said to myself," he writes, "in this babble, I will go to headquarters. If I am spirit, and this God they talk so much about is spirit, we can somehow communicate, or the whole thing is a fraud." Now, I love this statement, especially for the second part, because what Charles Fillmore was proposing to himself was an experiment with a hypothesis, and a hypothesis that was falsifiable. Now, I'm not going to go into the details, the sort of technical details that philosophers do about this idea of falsification, but kind of the point is this is a very sort of scientific approach. You try something to see if it works. If it doesn't work, then you've proven something that it doesn't work. Okay. So he simply began persistently to meditate every night at a set hour, using all the different prayers and affirmations that others had suggested. So focusing on what he was studying, which initially he didn't really believe in, but he just thought, I'm going to try this. So he started doing it. And every night he prayed. It was I liked his description of it because he talks about how at first he just kind of had to force himself to go into prayer and to meet this bid. He sort of had made this determination he was going to do this in a business-like manner. But that over the course of time, he found he actually looked forward to it and enjoyed it. And this is one of the things that sometimes happens with people initially when they begin practice of prayer or meditation, that initially they're a little bit reluctant or have difficulty sort of making themselves do it. But as they continue, they find that it is something that is enjoyable for them, and eventually something that is powerful and meaningful for them. Okay. So the second point about how to find truth is found in this experiment. Okay. The second point was to experiment with a theoretical consequence that can be falsified. So again, this is part of the scientific method. It means that instead of trying to prove a hypothesis true, you try to prove it false. Okay? So if your experiment shows the hypothesis is not false, that's pretty much the same thing as proving that it is true. Okay, or in some scientific areas, that it is most probably true, that it is probably true. Okay. So again, I won't go into the technicalities of the method. It's an unnecessary digression. The point is that you can do as we can do, as Charles Fillmore did. We can experiment with prayerful meditation to see if it helps us connect with God in some way that's meaningful for us. And if you cannot, to your satisfaction, connect with or communicate with spirit, that's the thing he was trying to do, communicate with spirit, with a higher power, higher wisdom through prayer, then you can, reject belief in communicating with spirit as something that's not true for you anyway. Right? Or another experiment you can engage in that a lot of people do is testing the law of mind action. There's all kinds of suggestions about how to do that, about praying and visualizing to get something you seek to manifest. And so the hypothesis might be something like this. If the law works, then I can use it to manifest good. If the law works, then I can use it to manifest good. Or, as Charles Fillmore put it, the whole thing is a fraud. But I want to point out something that's very important in his discussion of this. Mr. Fillmore tried a variety of methods, right? And he was persistent. He talks about how he worked at this for months before he got any kind of result. So he didn't just try it once and say, oh, that didn't work. He kept working with these ideas, giving them a fair test, I guess you could say. So when you read books or hear lessons about how to use the law of mind action, let's say, try the method and see what happens, but give it a fair test. If nothing happens, then you move on to other methods. But if after a fair test of methods you get no results, then you have a scientific reason, in effect, to accept the hypothesis. I'm sorry, if after a fair test you get results, then you have a reason to accept the hypothesis, and as Charles Fillmore did, of communication with the oversoul. So what did happen in Charles Fillmore's experiment? Well, he goes on and tells us about that too. He writes, at a time came when I began to observe that I was having exceedingly realistic dreams. He found he was having precognitive dreams and dreams guiding him about business affairs. He goes on and says, I watched my dreams closely and found that there was a wider intelligence manifesting in my sleep than I had seemed to possess in the waking state. And it flashed over me one day that this was the mode of communication that had been established in response to my desire for information from headquarters. So he found he could communicate with spirit to his satisfaction in his dreams. And he then goes on to say he realized that this mode of communication was a mode that was found in the Bible, in stories of Jacob, Joseph, and other biblical characters. Now, in the article, Charles Fillmore does not cite a passage from the Bible, but that I think is very relevant here. Right? In other places, he may have cited this, but this is actually from Numbers. It's God speaking to Moses in the story. And God says, hear my words. When there are prophets among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. So this was part of the ancient Jewish message of prophecy. What that if there's someone who has that is to be is to speak for God, then God would reveal God's self in dreams. So anyway, Fillmore goes on about this idea of knowledge of dreams. He recognized that the language of dreams is symbolic and that knowledge from dreams requires correct interpretation. He makes clear in the article that dreams are one way, but not the only way that spirit communicates. Sometimes communication, he says, may come in direct inspiration. So it's not the only way, but it is a way that we may receive information or we may communicate with this higher mind or this greater mind that is within us. And I would add to those to inspiration and dream a couple other ways that spirit communicates. For example, sometimes we may get dreamlike images or hear a word while we're in a meditative state, a deep meditative state. So that'd be somewhat different than a dream, right? That communication may also come, I think, in signs in the external, what Carl Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences. Now, modern psychologists and scientists are skeptical about synchronicity, but the phenomenon of quantum entanglement in physics suggests that seemingly coincidental events can be more connected and more meaningful than they seem. But again, I'm not going to go off into a tangent on quantum entanglement. The point is, there is some reason to believe that there's something more going on than coincidences, as Jung suggested. Let's just say spiritual things must be spiritually discerned. When you are in communication with spirit, no physical scientific explanation is required. You just know it, as Charles Fillmore just knew it. And so this brings us to a third point in the article about how to know the truth. We can get knowledge, guidance from intuitions, from dreams, and as I've added, even from seeming coincidences, from synchronicities. So at this point, I ought to say a little bit about dream interpretation. First, there are multiple theories about how to interpret dreams, right? Second, there is no scientifically agreed upon or verified method for understanding dreams. So psychologists today are currently sort of split on the value of Freudian dream interpretation. And there's a kind of current trend to in dream study to just interpret dreams as neurological events with no particular meaning. Dreams are meaningless, they're just neurological events. On the other hand, Jung's theory actually has grown in acceptance among psychologists, but again, not universally accepted. I personally believe that Jung's theories are generally more helpful, at least for personal growth, than Freud's theories or the neuroscience approach. And I guess what I believe ultimately is that each person is the best interpreter of their own dreams. And I would make a third point that not all dreams are equally meaningful. You feel or know whether a dream is important or not. Important dreams tend to stick with you. The other dreams tend to fade away fairly quickly. You may not even remember that you dreamed when you wake up. I thought I'd share, to do something I don't ordinarily feel that comfortable with, but I feel comfortable with you, with this group. I wanted to share some personal experiences to illustrate the meaningfulness of dream interpretation. And you might also recall, in addition to Charles following his dreams, Myrtle did the same thing. That was why she had a dream that led her to realize that her mission was to bring this new teaching to the children, right? So my method for dream interpretation, such as it is partly Jungian, and I guess I would describe it as partly yogic. The Jungian part is paying attention to archetypal symbolism, trying to get some sort of understanding of archetypal symbols. The yogic part is basically just meditation on dreams, sort of asking the symbols what they mean and trusting what comes to you in that moment. So I call it yogic because the Yoga Sutras say that we can get knowledge from meditation on dreams. So that's sort of my method, such as it is. But I'm telling you sort of like quick, specific sorts of examples, dream interpretation as part of my experience. First one is actually with somebody else's dream. Uh, I knew this woman, and she told me, and this wasn't in a confidential or counseling setting. It was just an informal conversation. She just told me about this dream she had. She was standing on a mountain holding a baby, and then she dropped the baby. And this was very disturbing to her, as you can understand it would be in terms of the imaging, but it's very also dramatic and um, I want to say memorable, right, to say the least. So she kind of asked me if I had any theories about that. I said, well, it sounds to me like some kind of birth dream, actually, a dream about birth. So a new birth. So it could be, I said that there's some kind of change that may be happening in your life that's going to make your whole experience kind of new life, a new birth. And I said another possibility is that it's just a dream about someone in your family uh, who's going to have a baby. Okay, which that's just what I told her. Right. So like it was a couple weeks later, I saw her again, and she was kind of excited, and she told me, oh, I just found out that my daughter-in-law is pregnant. Right. So I saw that dream, even as her dream, as a kind of precognition or a sort of a bit of information about something that she didn't consciously know about, that no one had told her about, that her daughter-in-law was going to have a baby. So you never know, what exactly what a dream is going to turn out to be. But for her, that was a satisfactory explanation of the dream, and it gave her some sort of insight into, okay, there's some sort of higher knowledge or consciousness that we can be in touch with. Okay. Let me tell you about another dream. I don't want to go into these too long, but one that I had that was I consider a precognitive dream. Um, okay, so this one's I haven't had that many precognitive dreams, but this one was pretty clearly was. I was background on it. I was taking a course in graduate school. It was I found extremely difficult. It was symbolic logic, right? And the professor had this. He would give us tests on the different things we had read, and then towards the end of the course, he said, "Now, um, you can. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop your lowest score, right? And if dropping your lowest score, if taking the final would not change your grade, then you don't have to take the final, right?" So I go, well, that seems fair, right? So, and people in the class really liked that idea. They didn't have to take the final, but I decided I wanted to take the final because even though it could not change my grade based on his system. It could not change my grade. I knew I had pretty much a solid B, I guess, in the course, and so I just mentioned to the professor that, well, um, taking the final won't can't change my grade, but I'm going to do it anyway because I want to learn the material. And he said, and so he said to me, well, I'll tell you what, if you can get 100% on the final, I'll give you an A. I thought, well, I kind of chuckled because I didn't think that was even good. There was any way that was going to happen. As I said, it was a very difficult course, and I hadn't gotten any 100% scores on any of the tests that he'd given. So fine, whatever. So I studied for the test. I took the test. Okay, so after the class was over, but before the grade reports were sent to us, I had this dream, and in the dream, I received an A in the course. Now, this is weird. I woke up and I thought, well, okay, that's funny and unlikely. But then, I don't know, it was about a week later, I think, where the grades were mailed out. I got my grades and I saw that I had an A. And I was very surprised, to say the least. So I went to the professor and I just said, well, I, I see I got an A in the course. And he said, yeah, he said, you're the only student I've ever had who got 100% on the final. And that was also shocking. And my point is not to brag about how smart I am because I wasn't really that smart in that course. I just sort of, pulled it off in that final. My point is that my subconscious or whatever anticipated what was going to happen. in a way that I did not expect, and it turned out to be true. So, in effect, it was a kind of precognitive dream that I suppose somehow relieved some of my anxiety about the course. Um, okay, so that's another kind of dream. I've had spiritual dreams. I think I've had a number of them. I think I will just tell you about one of those. Um, Actually, I think I'll tell you about two of them. The first one's pretty easy. This was before I found unity. I had this dream. I was I was definitely spiritually seeking. When I had this dream, it was very vivid. I was walking in a forest, and there was an invisible presence with me. I guess the way as I would describe it. And this presence, came to a clearing, and this presence said to me, "This is him. This is Jesus." Right. And so what in front of me was a group of men sitting sort of in robes, sitting around a campfire. And just as this voice said, "This is him. This is Jesus," one of them turned around, which I took to be this. Okay, this is Jesus that he's talking about. And I was startled, and he laughed. And part of what I was startled by was he didn't look like I expected, because all my life I'd seen all the same pictures you have, this sort of Nordic, uh, Aryan, if you will, Jesus. And this Jesus was, um, I want to say, sort of Asian looking, I guess is the way I would put it. And what I took that dream to mean, what I came to understand that that dream meant, was that there's a spirit that leads us to, in this case, not Jesus, but the Christ consciousness, and that Christ consciousness has something in common, not only with what Jesus taught, but with sort of, in effect, Asian or Eastern teachings. Okay. And um, my path has involved sort of looking at different spiritual approaches and finding the common elements. So the common elements in the teachings of unity and mysticism and so on. Right? So that was one dream that I had that was very meaningful for me. I had some others. One other one I'll just tell you is real quick. I think I have time. It's kind of a funny one. Um, I was in a house, and I came into a room, and there was someone there that I recognized in the dream as being God, or I'm going to say a sort of an image of God. And it was kind of funny because the image actually was a comedian, right? But in the dream, this comedian was sort of an embodiment of God to speak to me. And so I asked a question, and I said, if you are good and you are all that there is, then how can there be evil? Okay, sort of a theological question, I guess you could say. And he just looked at me and smiled and said, life has a tendency to resist certain boundaries. So I took this dream to mean that life evolves, that our human concepts and rules and expectations don't always hold up under the evolving of life or under the evolving of consciousness. And so our concepts of good and evil are basically, I want to say, are not fundamentally true, a sort of ironclad way. They're just these boundaries that we put up, and we try to put the good, and we put God or truth into a box. But we're dealing with the infinite. And so the infinite can't be confined by these boundaries that we set up in our minds, these dualistic conceptual boxes. So that dream was also, for a long time, very meaningful for me and very satisfying in terms of how I look at things. So anyway, my point is um, that dreams can convey precognitions, they can convey guidance, they can answer questions that we have. Right? Again, not all dreams are meaningful. There's maybe, if I were to make a list of really meaningful dreams in my life, there'd probably be like 12 of them, or maybe 20 of them, right? That were important for me. But you'll know when those dreams are meaningful. And if you dialogue with them, if you talk with the symbols will tell you sort of the meaning. And the meaning may unfold over the course of time. It may not be sort of, immediately clear, but over the course of time, it becomes more and more clear what those dreams met because they stick with you, and they're best. I think they're messages. They're communications from a higher consciousness than our ordinary waking consciousness. So to summarize the epistemological points about the nature of knowledge and Charles Fillmore's insightful understanding of knowing truth because of his quest for truth. The first point was that words connect to ideas and feelings so that the words we use make a difference in what we experience. So use the words in prayer and meditation that are most powerful for you. Right? Others can suggest ideas, but you need to discover, which words connect with the idea, right? To experience it, to know it. So that's the first point. Just words are important, but they're also individually interpreted. Second point about how to know truth is the idea of experiment. Experiment with a theoretical consequence that can be falsified, or as we put it in simpler language, does it work or not? You try something, you give it a fair trial. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you move on to something else, right? And so that's a way we know truth. That's really, in effect, the essence of the scientific method. You test the hypothesis to see if it works. And all of these ideas, by the way, are carried on throughout Charles Fillmore's writings. And the third point about how to know truth is that we can get knowledge from intuitions, from dreams, and of course, I added even seeming coincidences, synchronicities, signs, as we call them. And so we pay attention to these sort of non-empirical, non-sort of rationalistic experiences that can still give us some insight into truth, some knowledge, or some guidance. Now, going back to sort of the idea of language, the traditional traditional Christian interpretation uh, of the Holy Trinity is an idea, as many people feel, that sort of suggests an external power that must be appeased by worship and faith and works or ritual confession or whatever. But this is not the unity interpretation. The unity interpretation is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are phases of one universal being, one universal mind, the phases being respectively mind, idea, and expression. And all of these, this Trinity is within us. All of us have the Father mind in us. All of us have the Christ idea or the Son in us. All of us have the Holy Spirit, that is the expression of God in us. These are all phases of consciousness, phases of your consciousness and my consciousness, phases of your being. The Spirit then will lead us into all truth, as Jesus said. Not just will lead us, but the Spirit within us really is leading us to all truths. Our role is to follow that leading as best we can. Intentionally following Spirit includes not merely interpreting your dreams, but just as important, I think, following your dreams, as Charles Fillmore did. And so I'll leave you with this thought, not from Fillmore or from Emerson, but from another transcendentalist, Henry David Thoreau. He said, if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. Thank you, friends. Blessings. Appreciate the opportunity to share with you.